Welcome back to the Become Your Own Muse podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Lowy. Today, I'm so excited to have Shan on the podcast. Shan is the inner child work queen, and I'm so excited to dive into all things inner child work today. I actually don't know a lot about this subject, so I'm really excited to talk about this. And I have not done much of this work myself, so really excited to have you on, really excited to share your experiences and just talk about the work that you do with my audience. So
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you so much. It's interesting because I feel like even inner child work is such a mainstream topic. Like it's thrown around, everyone knows the term, but I feel like not enough people actually know the depth of the work and what it's actually for. So I'm excited that I get to talk about it because it's my favorite thing. It's something where like I've done the shadow work, I've done the ego work, I've done the limiting beliefs, I've done all of the things. But what I find is it always comes back to inner child work, right? Knowing that like it all starts in childhood, knowing that even with shadow work, it links to inner child work, ego work, it links to inner child work. Like it all comes back to it. So I feel like when you know inner child work and when you know your own inner child, everything starts to really make sense and the puzzles of the piece get to fall together really fucking effortlessly.
Yeah, it is. And I feel like you said, the people who've done other types of work, like you've dabbled in it and maybe you don't even realize it. So it's cool to just know like that's a huge foundation for a lot of work. And it probably makes a lot of other work you go on to do after that a lot easier to understand. And you know yourself a lot better that you can start to see those patterns play out in your life. And I'd love to hear how did you get into this? Like how did you start learning about inner child work? Where did this come from?
So I stumbled into inner child work. It wasn't purposeful. I didn't mean to. I fell pregnant. So I was 21. I was a young mummy and I fell pregnant to my now husband at the time, my now husband, boyfriend at the time. And I remember like looking at the stick and I was like, shit. Like I am so young. I don't know what to do. Like I've grown up with kids, I've got 6 siblings, I know kids, but how do I do this in the best way? Like how do I make sure I don't fuck up my kid because I want to do things differently. At the time, I was in a place which was a very wounded, lesser version of myself and I could talk about that later, but I fell into this work because I wanted to know how to be the best fucking mom.
Mm,
Like when you've got someone that you're responsible for and then they're your person, like you created them, it's like a
mm.
whole new level of intentionality comes into your life and even the role that you have in life. Like I remember that moment and it was wild. So anyway, I looked into parenting and I stumbled across conscious parenting. Of course, I led down the path of Dr. Gabor Mate, which so many people
Mm.
know. He's like honestly my biggest role model. So yeah, he's the best. He's the best. So that's how I fell into inner child work. I wanted to know how to be the best mum. I wanted to be super conscious. I wanted to be deliberate. I wanted to be specific about what I did. And in that, I noticed learning about trauma and wounding, all of these things, actually how much of that work fell on me. And so,
Mm.
in the journey of trying to learn to be the best mum that I could be, it actually became a journey of healing myself.
Mm.
And that's how I fell into inner child work. And then for a certain amount of time, a couple of years, I was in shadow work. I was doing all the other things, and I loved that. But I really looped back around, and I feel like in the last year in particular, like this is of the most important to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so huge. And that's so cool because it's like a lot of women may fall pregnant and then you have your child and you're kind of just like figuring it out as you go along. You're like, no, I want to be proactive. I want to be like the most conscious parent that I can be. That's incredible. I love that. When you started this journey, what was it like for you? Was it like was it exciting? Was it like holy shit? Was there a lot of shame involved? Like what was the journey like for you?
In terms of when I started inner child work,
Yeah.
it was it was a lot. Like I feel like I sort of fucking dove in the deep end there. It was a lot because I was learning about who I actually was and I was starting to unveil so much that I had to face the shame and the guilt from,
Mhm.
those teenage years and into early adult years. Like that was a lot. There was definitely a lot of emotional processing, but I feel like at the same time it was, and this is so cliche to say, but it was very much like a coming home feeling where I started to actually, because I was unveiling so much and I was letting my walls down, and I was starting to get to know who I was and what I experienced and what I didn't get to process. I actually started to come back around and start to get to know who I actually was and what I actually valued. So up until that point, I had actually been to uni and I'd been studying radiation therapy for 2.5 years. And I worked my ass off to get into that. Like, I worked so hard in school because of those perfectionism tendencies and good girl and, all of those narratives. And I got to a point where I was like, I'm actually not happy. Like, I would love to help people, but this doesn't feel like it was me, doesn't feel
Mm,
like it's me. And so through inner child work, it was like, I started to get to know who I was, what I actually wanted to do, and not what I was conditioned to believe
mm.
I had to do.
Yeah, that's huge. And what I kind of specialize in is emotional intelligence work, which inner child work really is a foundation of that. And a lot of times I say to my clients, because this is the journey that I went on, is like, I feel like I met myself for the first time in my upper 20s. And it's a weird feeling because you're going through all that like shame and guilt of, wow, look at how much I missed out on. Look at how I treated people during this time. So you have a lot of that kind of like looking backwards, but then you have to get to a point where you're like, okay, we're going to move forward from here and actually have control of my life from here. And how cool is it that I get to meet myself for the first time and start getting to know myself at this level that I didn't know before?
Yeah, and it's kind of like, you would know this feeling of when that shame and that guilt comes up. It's a lot, but at the same
Mhm.
time, it's like it's always going to come up.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like I was constantly fucking running. I was constantly trying to be someone that would make my mum and dad happy, that would prove everyone who did me wrong, that I am capable. I am worth something. And it was like when you get to a point where you stop running
Mm,
and you face those feelings and whatever you've suppressed, yeah, it's scary, but it's exactly what you said. You get to recreate your life. You get to recreate what you want to create, what you want to do, who you want to be. And it is that very liberating feeling that I feel like a lot of people don't know is available to them. Truth.
yeah. 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 For people who, because I know I had this thought when I heard about inner child work of like, well, I had a fine childhood. I had a great childhood. So what do you say to people who, I'm sure you probably hear that a lot. Like, I don't need this work. I'm fine. I had a great childhood. So what do you say to those people? Like, do you hear that a lot?
I hear that a lot. Yes.
Okay. I
Yeah.
figured.
It's such an interesting thing, and you have to think about we are wired, we're programmed to always protect ourselves. And if that means saying that we don't need something or we wouldn't benefit from something because we don't need it, right?
Mm,
Protect yourself, then okay, I understand where that comes from. And what I also think is like, if you are someone who runs that narrative of like, I don't need it, I had a great childhood, okay, just think about for a second, how would you feel if your kids had the exact same childhood as you?
mm,
Like, if you stopped and contemplated that, you'd be like, yeah, it was good. If you sat there long enough, you'd see some cracks. And
yeah.
it's interesting, I said the exact same thing. I come from a fantastic childhood. I had the most incredible parents, family, like, had a huge family. I lived on a farm. I was homeschooled. I had beautiful quality food. I rode bikes all day. Like, I had that. But that doesn't take away from what actually creates disconnection from yourself. Because a lot of people don't realize that it's not the event, it's your interpretation of the event.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Two kids, right? I'll give you an example. You could be a twin, right? And you grow up with the exact same circumstances, same parents, you grow up in the same household, you go to the same school, maybe you've got the same friends, but they could end up completely different. Why is that?
Yeah.
It's not the event, it's the interpretation of the event.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. And actually was just talking to my mom about this because she was telling me she has this memory of her childhood and it was a specific way, but her sister has a completely different memory of it, of like, this was really good. And she's like, this was really bad. And she's like, I don't understand how it could be so different, but it is. It's like your emotions and the events that happened, it's through your perception and it's through how you interpreted it which is why it's so important to become familiar with why you're interpreting things the way you are, why you have certain reactions, what your triggers are, things like that, and getting to know yourself, because that's how you understand where you got to today, and how you can interpret future situations. And so, how has your relationship with your son changed as a result of this work? Or like, how do you see it show up in your relationship?
Yeah, it's a lot. This is actually why I created my new course on parenting, but from an inner child work perspective, because it
Mhm.
was parenting is one of those things where you can't hide, and you're gonna face all of your inner child shit through your kid. Like
Yeah.
it's gonna happen, and I still find, little activations, triggers, if you want to call them, coming up every day. And
Yeah.
my biggest thing was emotions. So for me personally, in my childhood, I didn't have the freedom, or I interpreted that I didn't have the freedom to express sadness, anger,
Mm.
be seen a certain way. And so that really followed me through into adulthood, where I almost became this very cold person. And I got
Mm.
the stories of, I've seen you post about this, you're intimidating,
Mm.
you're this, you're that. And it was like, well, I actually wasn't that way. I just was so cut off and disconnected from my feelings and my emotions that I couldn't express myself freely. And so, what really happened for me, especially when my son, he's almost 3, came into those toddler years, was when he started to act out, as many parents will call it, emotions, crying, getting angry, tantrums. That was a huge activation for me, because I went my whole life suppressing how I
Mm.
felt. And so when I saw him expressing himself, getting angry if I said no to a lollipop, or crying if it was time to go home, or whatever it may be, it was this feeling in my chest where it was anger. I was,
Mm. Mhm.
because in my head I'm thinking, stop acting that way, because that's what I heard myself. So
Mm.
it's been very, very healing, to be honest. I see parenting as a very healing thing for me, because I'm actually healing through my son. I'm treating him the way that I needed to be treated, or I'm allowing him to do the things that I needed to feel or do.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, and it's a really cool way to put it, because if you don't do this work to understand, why you may be reacting the way you are, why you may be feeling certain emotions, you may lash out and not understand why. And that's really cool to be able to recognize that and have that level of conscious attention of like, wow, I'm feeling like this because of this.
Mhm.
And the dynamic that you're going to have with your child because of that could be drastically different. Like, and that like to be able to give your work to other parents,
Mhm.
that's incredible. That's really, really cool.
And do you know what, Danielle? It's also like what people think is normal in parenting.
Mm-hmm.
When I started to really like identify inner child work, what actually creates true wounding or disconnect from yourself, which is essentially what happens when you need inner child work, it was actually found in what so many people think is normal. And if
Mm.
you go back in time, you can actually backtrack to see where things started to shift, and why people think certain things are normal when in fact they're not normal, they're common. And what's common is usually very fucking dangerous. And that's really why, there was a certain amount of time as a coach where I didn't want to speak to parents because I was scared. And it's
Mm.
been
Yeah.
this year where it was like, I'm actually done. Like, I'm done hiding. I'm done fucking tiptoeing around people, walking on eggshells. Like, I know that this work actually helps, and I know that what I have challenged as normal is what most people need to realize. Because
Yeah.
there was, for example, there was even this book in the 60s. I can't remember what it's called, but it was essentially a parenting guide. And
Mm-hmm.
in this guide were these tips, were these guidelines of how to treat your children, how to raise them. And of course you can see the intention behind it to support parents and all of the things. But one part of that book is like, leave your kid to cry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Leave your kid to cry, because that's how they learn to self-soothe. Children, infants, don't literally have the capability to self-soothe. So even in that book was super common. Like, most of our parents would know that book probably. And
Mm-hmm.
that was passed through word of mouth, all of these things. And so people, even now, it's really common to sleep train. And I'm against that, if I'm honest, because it doesn't teach your child to self-soothe. It teaches your child to give up, to
Yeah.
stop asking for help because they know no one's coming.
Mm.
So when you start to challenge what people think is normal, especially in the world of parenting, you're going to get some people who absolutely fucking hate it. And I get
Mhm.
that. But also, you have to see the intention behind actually asking yourself, is this normal? Is this of the best benefit for my child and for myself? Or is this just what I've been told to do?
Yeah. Yeah. And just having that open opinion, like, could there be truth to this? Could there be another perspective? And that's something I do a lot too, is just challenging your normal. When people get so comfortable with this is normal, this is normal, this is normal, it's so hard to break out of that. And the things that most people normalize are actually kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the people who come in, and challenge that, yeah, there's going to be a lot of hate around that. And to be you I think what you do and both what I do too is like we have really strong opinions and we come in and we say, hey, I'm going to get you to question what you normalize, and I'm going to do that. And that can be really repellent for a lot of people who are not open-minded to that, and that's fine. But you're also going to get the attention of those who are like, what is she talking about?
Yeah.
Wait, she's questioning this, right? So the people who are a little bit curious, you wouldn't have gotten their attention if you weren't in their face being like, hey, pay attention to me, I'm going to get you to question what you normalize.
And
But it's hard to hold. I mean, as you probably get a lot of hate, as do I, with things, but it's worth it.
I think like that's the whole point. That's why we're here. We're here to interrupt people. We're here to okay, I'm gonna shake you to make you listen.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
if people have that, it's exactly what you said, that open-mindedness, that ability to be curious, they're actually gonna learn something, whether it be about whatever we're speaking to or about themselves, and that's perfect. And some people don't have space for that. Some
Yeah.
people don't want that, and I understand that. And it's exactly what you were just saying with the hate. it's interesting it's interesting to be on the receiving end. I
Hmm.
Because you actually get to see where society is at,
Hmm.
without judgment, but more so of like, okay, well, this is why this work is necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's further fuel. Yeah. So you named some of the things that you don't normalize or that you're challenging. I know you have a lot of like controversial opinions about parenting. What's a few of those that you want to share?
Are you trying to send me more hate?
I am. Let's go.
I'm expecting comments after this podcast has been released. Yeah, so I guess like the biggest one for me, and it's one of the most normal, is sleep training. It's
Hmm.
leaving your baby to cry, and I really, really, really disagree with that from a lot of heart. Like, please question that if that's something that you're doing, because it's really this part of you're not teaching your children to self-soothe and be able to regulate themselves, and to not be clingy. Like, you're creating them to have an anxious attachment in that, or to
Yeah.
completely dissociate from themselves. What makes you think they're going to be able to connect to other people? What makes you think they're going to be able to form healthy relationships in adulthood? It's a huge cascade of effects, which is very negative. um I guess like other controversial opinions that I have is that you shouldn't yell at your kids. um Man, you shouldn't. It doesn't teach kids to listen and to respect you, which a lot of people think. It actually teaches kids to duck their heads, to
Mhm.
to be a good little girl, to be a good little boy. And of course, like, there's a beautiful positive side to that, but the duality is that there's a lot of negative effects for that as well. People
Yeah.
pleasing, which so many people, most people and adults actually do these days, and they're trying to get away from. Where do you think that came from? Right?
Yeah.
Other controversial beliefs that I have about parenting, what do I want to go with? Well, making your kid kiss people, making your kid do certain things when it comes to affection. I think I posted a reel about this, and I think there was like 90,000 views on it or something like that, and there was a lot of feedback from that, which actually said things like, "Oh, this is why people are disrespectful these days, and this is why X, and this is why Z." And it was really, really interesting to me because as a parent myself, I felt tempted to say, hey, Alfie, which is my son,
Mhm.
give mom pop a kiss, give nan a kiss, like say
Mhm.
goodbye, but you have to really refrain from that because especially when it comes to affection, you're
Mhm.
making your kid do something. Again, that's gonna lead to people pleasing as the number one behavior in adulthood. And I think when it comes to making your kid be affectionate, you have to think about how would you feel if you were in a stall, like in a toilet stall or something, and someone came in and your mum was with you and said, give him a kiss.
Mm.
You'd be like, I'm not fucking giving him a kiss. I don't even know them. It's the exact same thing,
Yeah.
right? It really threatens a child's safety. And I'm going down a spiel here, but when you look at the needs of a child, safety and security is one of the most prominent. They're not going to feel safe and secure if they're being made to cross their own internal boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that leads to intimacy issues down the line as well of their own. So I want to go back to something you said because I want to hear your perspective on this. The second point you made of not yelling at your children. So, my childhood, my parents were they never yelled at me, never reprimanded me. It was very like soft spoken, like it's okay. So, I grew up to learn that anytime I was challenged or like someone raised their voice at me, I got very scared. And it was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to handle this. So, how do you balance the not like yelling at them, but also not having them turn to a person that fears conflict because they don't experience it?
Yeah, I love this question. So, this is about being able to assert yourself as a parent, as a leader, right?
Mm,
You are still their disciplinary, but you're doing it through a healthy means. And I think what happens in your case of when you pendulum too far and you're super soft, and I did this for a certain amount of time as a parent myself because I was scared. I didn't want to
yeah.
wound him. I didn't want to affect him, like all of those sorts of things. It actually has the opposite effect. And
Mm,
that's exactly what you've just said of when conflict arises, confrontation, you have to assert yourself, whatever it may be. It's scary because you're not used to it. So this is really where I like to tell parents to allow your children to make mistakes, to be able to speak a certain way and, actually for you even for example, like questioning when you had an opinion, how were you allowed to express that?
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I was the opposite of I grew up with lots of loud noises and yelling and things like that. So for me, when I was an adult, when I heard loud noises or when I was yelled at, it was like I would go very inward. I'd go into a shell because I felt so unsafe and I'd startle really, really easily if people jumped out of nowhere and things like that.
Yeah. 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 That's interesting. So obviously there's two parties. There's you and your husband.
Yeah.
So how has this work? How has he responded to it? How does he incorporate it? How does it work between the two of you?
He is honestly the most amazing person. Like, I couldn't have picked a better father, truthfully. I don't know anyone who could parent better than him. He's much more grounded and calm than me, which I love. He teaches me a lot, in fact.
Hmm.
And when it comes to integrating this work into the way that we parent our son, we honestly just we have really really open communication, and a lot of the things that I've learned we've spoken about, we've shared. And there have been times, look, I'm not perfect, I've lost my temper, I've you know slam something down or something when things aren't going my way, and Alfie's, yelling or screaming or whatever,
Yeah.
and he's actually been like, "Hey Shan, like remember we've got to try and stay a little bit more calm. He doesn't have to be the receiving end of that." So the way that we've been able to weave it in has honestly been effortless. You know,
Mm,
and the way that I like to see it is it's actually not hard to weave in. It's actually
mhm,
very easy because you'll find it's very natural for you. You have
mhm,
natural instincts. And an example of that is if you've ever heard a baby crying, or you've been at someone's house and they've put baby to bed and baby's crying, you'll feel a lot of discomfort. You'll feel dysregulated because you're going against your natural instincts. And it's the
mm,
same thing that I like to think about parenting. If you can soften your ego and let your fucking walls down and not need to preserve a concept of self in front of people in particular, then you'll actually find you know all the answers. Your
Yeah.
your intuition will always lead you in a positive way when it comes to parenting. I believe that to be true.
Yeah.
However, only for people who have actually worked on their inner child, because they're only going to operate from their wounds themselves otherwise.
Yeah. So you probably have clients who maybe they're starting to dabble in this work. Maybe they've been doing it for a while and then they have a partner who hasn't or maybe doesn't get it. What do you recommend to those type of people if they start to feel this friction in their relationship? I know sometimes when you start doing personal development work, one person does, the other person may feel superior or not, or it may get a little dicey based on the way that you're communicating. So what do you recommend for people in this situation?
I think it very much depends on what the type of dynamic is in your household. So, for example, if your husband is yelling, then that, like, you're yelling at your child, that's when I would actually step in and be like, hey, I love you, but I'm not going to let you yell at our baby, because that's something that's quite serious in my eyes. If it's
Yeah.
something more so like, they're um they don't want to they don't want to give the child a lollipop, and so the child starts screaming and throws a tantrum, and then the dad's like, you need to stop crying. I get it, but that's probably a little bit less of something. So it's kind of, it depends on the situation, but as a blanket statement, I'd say you just need to first of all understand what it takes for them to act in that way, because
Mhm.
just as you have your own shit, you have your own wounds, your partner's going to have theirs. So be compassionate to them. Don't ever speak down to them, and try to work as a team. Exactly as
Mhm.
the mentor says, come into mutual meaning. How
Mhm.
is this benefiting both of us? And for things like yelling, smacking, leaving them alone, like timeouts and things like that, that's when you'd probably insert yourself, because at the end of the day, I don't want your child to come in between your relationship, but you are responsible for the way that your child grows up. So things like that, you got to be a bit more on the line.
Yeah. 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 So you started in the beginning talking about, oh, I used to be in this place, now I'm here. I want you to just like tell the people listening the impact this work has had on your life, not just with your relationship with your son, but just like the person that you've become. We've kind of dabbled in this, but just more, just like why inner child work, personal development, just working on getting to know yourself is so important and how it's impacted your life specifically.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm gonna open up here. I'm gonna just like put my fucking heart on the sleeve, and I'm gonna paint the picture of when I was at my lowest point, so that
Yeah.
you can see where I'm at now, and even just like how I'm speaking to you, what you're hearing me talk about, my ability to be confident in polarizing opinions and things like that. You'll see for yourself what this has done for me. And so, at my lowest point in my life, it was around the 20, 21 years of age mark, just before I got pregnant. And, up until this point, I had found myself forcing myself into places, and specifically into groups that I wasn't meant to be in, and
Mm.
doing things that I thought I'd never do. So there were times when, honestly, I was drunk like 5 days of the week minimum.
Mm.
I remember one time I was so drunk that the next day I woke up and I was vomiting up blood. And, I did all the drugs, I did all those things, but it was because I was so insecure. I felt so unworthy. I felt so less than. I was genuinely a shell of a human in this uni, forcing myself into groups where they didn't even fucking want me in them.
Mhm.
And it was like I was facing this reality, and all I knew what to do with that was to disconnect from myself. And so
Mm.
that's why I fell into drinking so heavily, and taking drugs and doing those sorts of things, sleeping with people, not even remembering it the next day, because I was trying to run away from that feeling.
Mm.
And I was such a broken human, where it was like I couldn't even go in town without makeup on, or with my hair done, or I had to wear revealing clothes because that's what got me attention, or I had to force and wiggle my way into people who were popular because that's what made me feel wanted. And so it was these things where it got to a point where I couldn't be sober because I wasn't comfortable. And I wasn't an addict by any means. I was at uni, but it was also this part of like, even after a bender or something, that night I'd be in my room, in my little dorm, my little uni room, and I'd just cry. Like I'd put on music, and I didn't know why I was upset. And there were times when people would come to me the next day and they'd be like, Shan, like, what was wrong with you last night? Like, you wouldn't stop crying. I'm like, I don't remember that. And I don't know why. I didn't know why I was upset. And it's because I was constantly running. I was constantly avoiding myself. I was constantly trying to make myself into something that I wasn't. And I was so unhappy. I was so unhappy. While most people were having the best time of their life, I was broken.
Mm.
I was broken. And so I moved back home with my partner. We fell pregnant and everything changed. And from that point, I ended relationships. I left jobs. I started investing in myself, which was unbelievably uncomfortable. Like at this point, I'm like, what am I doing? I literally have no idea where I'm going, what I'm meant to be doing. And all of a sudden, I was in one course, and then I thought, I actually want to do this for the rest of my life. And then I haven't stopped since.
That's so cool. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's vulnerable and brave. Thank you for sharing that. And
I haven't
yeah,
had that open on a podcast before, so
well, I really appreciate you sharing sharing it. No, and I think a lot, I mean, I have a very similar journey to yours, and I think a lot of the audience that I have is kind of on a similar journey as well, and they're attracted to that story of, just feeling like you're upset and you can't explain why, and you gravitate towards these things externally that you're latching onto to try to give you confidence, whether it's the alcohol or the sex or the drugs or the makeup or whatever it is, the filler, and it gives you that temporary circumstantial confidence, and it's just never fulfilling. And then as soon as you start to peel back the layers and get to the root of, hey, I'm actually going to start doing this type of work and start to really get to know myself, it's like you really literally can't go back. Like once you see it, you can't unsee it, and you understand like this is actually, when you get a taste of real, true, authentic confidence and understanding yourself, it's like, oh, okay, this is it. And it's I feel like you're probably in the same boat of me, what we were talking about earlier. Sometimes you just want to shake people and be like, I need you to listen. You want to scream from the rooftops because life gets to be so much better than it is. You just need to take the risk. You just need to start getting deep and start connecting with yourself. And
mm,
it's hard because, you know, you do want to like just like shake people and get them to wake up. And I think hearing stories like yours is going to be inspiring for people, and to know that this work, it really is monumental. And something I talk about a lot is I think people like to think that they're doing personal development work by doing like affirmations and like they're journaling and they're doing their positive self-talk. And they're like, whoa, I'm doing personal development work. And I'm like, you don't even know the
yeah,
half of it. And when you do it like that, it's almost like it's surface level, and it's almost like you feel obligated to do it. Oh, everyone else is doing it. I should be doing this. And it's sometimes people wait for something bad to happen, or they feel bad about something. Maybe you step on the scale and you don't like the number you see. Maybe you go out and got really drunk and you got in a fight with your partner and you're like, oh shit, I should probably like read a self-help book to get out of this, right? So people do it from a place of a very reactive state. And that's why it doesn't stick, and that's why it's a lot, it's there's so much more than the personal development work that people are doing. And a perfect example of this is the work that you do, this inner child healing work, and getting familiar with that. And I think to have people hear that is going to be really beneficial. Of there is more, like there is more, and you need to start doing the work.
yeah. And I think like what I want to add is sometimes you don't know there's a problem. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes because you get used to that feeling. It's a lot of like, even from inner child work and what sort of childhood you had, it can feel so familiar that it doesn't feel like a problem. So I know
Mm-hmm.
for me, like waking up and feeling like shit, and I say now that I felt unworthy and insecure, and I was a shell of a human. Like I can say that now, but I didn't see it then. And I didn't know
Yeah.
it then. So it's like if you feel like you're in a spot where you just don't quite feel so fucking happy, like so fulfilled, and not the part that you need to be happy all the time. It's not that, it's more so like you genuinely feel at one with yourself, and you know you're on the right path, and you feel good in your skin, and you feel like you
Mhm.
genuinely feel that authentic and genuine confidence. Perfect. But if not, it's okay to actually change that. And
Yeah.
it's okay. I feel like for me, when I was 2021, I almost needed someone to pull me into it, just to wake me up, because I was so used to living that fake reality, and
Mhm.
it felt like I was wearing a mask all day. I couldn't really be myself. That became so common that I didn't know I was doing it. So
Yeah.
even just recognizing, if you're not unbelievably fulfilled right now, it's okay to change that, and you get to change that.
Yeah. And I think something else too is it's hard to go first.
Mm,
If you are surrounded by the people who play into the same patterns as you, that do the same things as you, that are not confident like you are, it's hard to go first. You have that itch of like, I want to be better. And I think, and I was actually just thinking about this yesterday of when I started doing this work, how many people I've met and now associate with and have built relationships with that I never would have known in a million years that I could have the level of depth and conversations and just like connections with people. I never even knew that was possible. So, for the women out there who are listening, who maybe you're scared to go first, of like, oh, I'm going to lose people. Yeah, you probably will. And there's going to be some people who come with you and some people who don't. But there are so many relationships that you're going to build along the way that you aren't even aware of.
mm. That was the
So,
biggest thing for me. Like, I was scared of losing people. I
hmm.
was scared of what people would think. And at the crux of it, I didn't want to be alone.
Yeah.
What it was, which
Hmm.
I could ramble on about where that comes from. But it's that's how you build that self-trust, though. That's how you build
Hmm.
that internal confidence, knowing that you've got your back and that you get to have other people. You don't need them. And the relationships and the people that you're meant to meet, it sounds airy fairy, but it's coming, but only when you're willing to actually step forward and change and do
Yeah.
something different. And if people fall away, that's perfect. It's scary, but you're gonna be absolutely fucking fine. You
Yeah.
will be fine. In fact, you'll be better off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And and you just think about even friendships that you've had in your life. I know when I was younger, when I was a teenager specifically, you prioritize hanging out with these people and you're just so immersed in it. And now if I think back, friends I was friends with 5 years ago, I'm not friends with anymore. And now have all these new friends, and you just don't know what's out there until you just start doing the work.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about your in-person events. I've seen videos. They look amazing.
Well, thank you.
Um, you recently held your first day event, is that correct? Tell me about it. What makes day events so different from online? Tell me all the things.
Cool. So, yeah, I hosted my first in person day event, what, 3 months ago, 2 months ago, or something like that. I got to a point, and I'm sure you've been to this point where it was like, I miss seeing people. Yeah,
Mhm.
I miss having that connection. Like, I almost want to get like a casual job or something and just like speak to humans and see people
Mhm.
in real life. And I love online. Look, I love meeting with my clients every day and seeing people at 6 p.m. every night on my calls. Like, I love that. But sometimes I want to see someone transform in front of my eyes. And I know that
Mhm.
that's possible because I've done it myself. I've been to my mentors' events. I've locked in more events. I love in person events. But I think the reason why I brought them in is because the biggest thing for me, and this really segues beautifully off what we're just talking about, is I needed to meet people that I wanted to be around.
Mm.
That was the biggest thing for me. Biggest thing. Because up until that point of when I got into this work, it was like I felt alone, and I needed to meet people who were on the same path and who were like minded, all of those beautiful things. But I didn't know where to find that. And then
Mm.
when I
Mhm.
did find that, it changed my life. And so
Mhm.
I wanted to do the same thing for the people in my community, especially because I live in such a remote place. It's like sometimes someone has to go first. It's exactly what you were just saying. Someone has to go first. And when you experience that firsthand, there's nothing like it. And I think,
Mhm.
being the person to facilitate it is unbelievably special. Um, and it really does anchor me into like why I love this work and why I keep doing it. And when things
Mhm.
get tough, it's like I remember that event, and yeah, it's really, really special. I've got another one locked in for June. People traveling internationally, interstate, which is actually blows my mind. Like I'm unbelievably grateful that people would go to those lengths. And yeah, it's so, so special.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and exactly like what you said, I was just in Australia at one of my mentors' retreats, and it's funny because it just carries on with you. I'll be doing a run outside and I'm, tired at the point 0.8 mile mark, and then I'm coming up and I'm like, "Oh, I'm tired." But then you think of the event and you think of the women and you think of the collective and you're like, "Well, I don't want to let them down." Right?
Yeah.
Like and you think back to that whatever you're going through in your life of how it resonates back to the event, and it just kind of cascades on from there, and you get really grounded into the work you're doing by just remembering it's not just about you anymore. And I think that's tying back into what you were saying is sometimes it does feel like even though you are in the online space and you have all these people doing this work, when you go in person, you're just reminded like I'm not alone. There are real human beings doing this work, and you just have that deeper level of connection, and it just really helps you to do this type of work and be more open-minded to it.
And I think as well, the power of in person events
Hmm.
and things like that is that, of course, there's the energetic side. When you're in
Yeah.
a room, it's powerful. And I feel like as well, your body remembers that. And so I speak a lot about
Mhm.
we do inner child healing, but on a somatic level, when you change your actual physical feelings in your body, your nervous system, your body remembers. Just as your body remembers wounds and whatever happened to you in childhood, it's going to remember huge events like this. And I love that you said, like, when you're on a run and you get tired, your body takes you back there. It's the exact same thing. I
Yeah.
started running after going to my mentor's retreat. I started running. The whole narrative, I'm not a runner, I can't run, I'm too short, my legs are too little, blah, 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 like all of those stories. And now I'm training for a marathon. So it's like you can never anticipate what will come from an in person event. But when you are in that room, everything changes. And I know that that's fucking, it's cliche terms. It's like, give me more depth. But truthfully, the hardest step is buying the ticket because you're not sure what you're in for. And then you go
Yeah.
to the event and it's like, I get it. Like I
Yeah.
actually feel I not just know, not just intellectually, I physically know that there is more for me because I just
Mm,
experienced it.
yeah. Yeah. What would you say to those people who are scared to be in person, especially if they're like the only one coming by themselves? What would you say to them?
I would say end. Like end.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're scared, end. That's the whole point.
Hmm.
The first event that I ever went to was 4.5 hours away. I went not knowing a single soul. I went alone.
Hmm.
I was breastfeeding at the time. I was terrified to leave my baby, leave my husband, the mum guilt. I didn't know anyone. I wanted to tap out, but I knew that I had to be there. I wasn't going to give in to my excuses anymore. I didn't want to
Yeah.
be that person. So if you're scared, literally all I have to say to you is end.
Yeah.
That's it.
Powerful. Yeah. You don't even know what's possible for you. Yeah. This, never come out of a live event the same. Like it just like you said, I think that was a really good way. I never thought about it like that, where it just locks into your body and your body just remembers it. And that's wholeheartedly true. Can confirm that. Was there anything else we haven't covered that you want to cover that you want my audience to know about? Anything else on your mind?
Anything else on my mind? I think like what I feel called to share is because when you've done such deep work, let's go with shadow work for example. When you've done such deep work, it can feel like inner child work is too beginner. And I just
Mm,
really want to ground everyone back in and remind you that just as you are gonna look at your limiting beliefs or your shadows for a 500th time. You have to do the same for your childhood. I don't care how much inner child work you've done. I don't care if you've ever done it or if you've never done it. Like, you have to do it.
Mhm.
You have to do it. And even, for example, if we're looking at shadow work, when are your shadows created? In your childhood,
Mm.
because that's when you're actually learning what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong. Same with ego. When's your ego created? In childhood, literally 0 to 7. Limiting beliefs, where do they come from? What you were told through conditioning. So it's like, you're going to find when you actually question it that every little piece of self development, personal development is going to come back to inner child work.
Mm. Yeah.
And so I just wanted to mention that because sometimes, I've explained this in courses and people haven't seen the link of like, wow, I didn't realize that this was the missing part. And I think when you, even with emotional intelligence, your inner child is the center of your emotions, of suppressed emotions, of intuition, of creativity. If you want to tap into your feminine, guess what? You're looking at inner child work. So it all comes back there. If you feel like something's missing, if you feel like there's just something that you haven't quite looked at, guarantee you it's inner child work.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so important. And something I say too with emotional intelligence is if you're not familiar with that, your emotions, like you're basically just a giant baby walking around letting that part of you play out in one way or another without you, most of the time without you even realizing it.
Yeah.
So you have to get to know that or else it's just going to play out. And I think too, what's so important is we've obviously talked a lot about your main focus, I think, is parents, but I mean, this is applies for everyone. Like, no matter who you are, doing this work, doing inner child work, it's gonna impact you in a positive way, whether you go on to have children or not. It's gonna be huge just to be able to understand yourself, understand where your emotions are coming from, how that plays out on people around you.
And it's funny because, like, this is what I say, most adults are little kids at big bodies.
Yeah.
They're throwing the tantrums, they're acting like little kids, they're being little brats, and where does that come from? Childhood. So it's
Yeah.
absolutely not just specific to parents. Like, I did this work before I even had my child, and up until that point, I was projecting onto my partner. I was playing out my really insecure, anxious, clingy, avoidant shit. Like, I was doing weird things, getting jealous. I was comparing myself, sneaking through my boyfriend's phone at the time, like all of those really wacky things. And so when you actually look at, oh shit, like I'm not perfect, and I have some things to look at, you actually get to see just the person that you're meant to be and the person that you currently are, and this work will allow you to bridge that gap.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people too, it's like you almost feel like you don't know yourself or you have the I know before I started doing this work, a question I had a lot was like, who am I? What's really my personality? Because when you're reacting and you don't understand why, when you're doing this childlike behavior that you haven't necessarily healed or understood yet, it feels strange and it feels like an out of character moment. Or, it just it feels like you don't understand where it's coming from. And then I think that's why a lot of people, I hear this a lot. You may hear this a lot where people say like, I don't really know who I am. I don't know my personality. I don't know truly who it is that I am.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like, it's interesting because I too experience that, and I see that in clients that I work with, and often they'll come in, they'll say like, I don't really think there's much for me to work on, like I feel pretty good, and then halfway through they're like, I can see where I've been selling myself a story and telling myself something just to run from things, and
Mm-hmm.
when you can face that, but of course you have to be willing to face that and really let your ego down. That's when you'll actually start to get to know yourself. That's when you actually learn who you are. And I think what's really beautiful is kids can teach us so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I watch my son, I watch my nephews, my nieces, I watch them play, and I'm like, they never struggle to express something. Even
Mm-hmm.
babies, like, if they're upset, they'll fucking tell you. Like, you'll know about it. They're crying, and the way that they go and play with people at the park, like my son will go and make a best friend, follow them everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
confidence and their ability to assert boundaries. No, don't play with my toy. I don't want you to play with my toy. Like, if you can watch kids, you'll learn about what probably a lot of your true nature is.
Mm.
But it's just that through time and through years of conditioning and experiences that made you feel a certain way, you shut off from that part of yourself. But the beautiful part is you can open back up to it.
Yeah. 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 That's a really good point because I feel like in my own journey, a way I can describe it is it's almost like I'm getting back to my child self. It's that curiosity, it's that love for life, it's setting boundaries, it's expressing yourself. You're almost just like reconnecting with that child, but doing it in a healthy way where you can now express yourself in a healthy way. You can communicate with other people in a healthy way, but you get back those good parts of you, the curiosity, the love for life and all of that. So that's a really cool. Yeah, that's a cool way to say it.
Oh, 100%. Like I always talk about the gift of when you integrate your inner child, or if you get more creative, you become
Mm-hmm.
more intuitive, you understand what you actually want, you feel more confident, you can assert yourself, all those boundaries that were really sloppy, you're all of a sudden able to actually say no, like I don't want to do that, or yes, but no, and things like that. So it's the best, and I think it makes sense. I always think about the moment that I learned it and I let it fully land, like my life made sense. I made sense. My relationships made sense. My insecurities made sense. Why I did that made sense. And it was a relief.
Mm-hmm.
It was a relief. Like even very simple things like when dad would come home from work and I say, Dad, like, can you play with me? And he couldn't. He was busy, he was stressed, he had things to do. I can look back at that from my logical and conscious adult lens and say, oh, well, he was busy, he had things to do. But my child self was probably like, he doesn't love me.
Mm-hmm.
He's not making time for me. I'm a nuisance. I'm annoying. He doesn't love me. Things like that. And when you look at it from that sense, again, you make sense. And when you make sense, you're going to open up this beautiful gift box of the intuition, the creativity, the fun, the play, and that side of you it's very much inside of you. It's a part of your
Mm-hmm.
psyche. And that even makes me think like if you feel like you don't have that lust for life, that playful side of you, and you're a very serious person. I was a very serious person. Super, super incredible indication that you need to reconnect with your inner child.
Yeah. Yeah. And using that example you just used with your dad, oh, he is busy. That's the logical brain. Your emotional side and your inner child is saying he doesn't love me. Like when you can learn how to regulate that and recognize that, that applies, maybe your husband had a long day at work and you come home and he's ignoring you a little bit, or maybe he's a little cold. And instead of you spiraling into, oh my gosh, I did something wrong, he's annoyed at me. It's like, no, you can use your logical brain and see that pattern playing out and be like, I'm not going to choose that because I actually understand what's going on here. But you wouldn't have had that ability otherwise.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing of like, say for example, Josh, my husband, for a certain amount of time, if he came home late, maybe he had to overwork or whatever, he had, I don't know, he had to fix something or something didn't go right at work, whatever it may be. He'd come home, I'd be like, well, you were meant to be home half an hour ago. Why
Mhm.
didn't you tell me? And he's like,
Mhm.
I was working, I'm sorry, it didn't go to plan. And it's like, well, thanks. Like you've just thrown all of our plans off and all of these things. And I can look at that now and say, oh, okay, I felt rejected.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Just like I felt rejected when my dad wouldn't play with me.
Yeah.
Everything's a pattern. I say this, everything makes sense. Nothing is by fate and nothing is by chance.
I love that. I love
Everything
that.
makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah. I love that. That's a perfect place to end. Well, tell us what you have upcoming. How can people reach you? How can people get in your world? Tell us all the things.
So you can find me on Instagram. It's at Shannon O'Shaughnessy. And I have lots and lots and lots of offers that where you can start to do inner child work, whether you're a newbie, whether you're advanced, whatever it may be, there's lots of offers. I have a free masterclass called What the Fuck is Inner Child Work. So that's a beautiful place to start. Otherwise, shedding is my core signature inner child work program, which is kind of like an introduction to inner child work. We're looking at your inner child in all areas of your life. And then I've got specific courses. So, Unshackle is for inner child work in romantic relationships, Interrupt is for inner child work in parenting. And there'll be lots of other stuff coming in the future. But at the moment, Interrupt is going to be live in a couple of weeks.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, everyone can benefit from this so much. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
And
Me.
we will talk soon.